recording.
The quality to record. Oh, and it even says Shawn Venice starting record.
That's how you'll know.
So, yeah, just as far as like as far as what is being experienced, or like how I'm experiencing it, I find it's like we touched on, it's mediated through perception, how we're looking at it or identifying with it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very much in the course of the last week when I got low, when I fell down. There's a resistance that arose in the early phases of it, that there's an intention arising that, oh, I need to fix this, I need to do something about it, I need to change my sleep pattern. And then it feels like it prolonged the experience, if you will, like that thing that I was trying to fix. It's almost as if I got stuck. There's like a feeling of stickiness, of getting stuck in that state, in looking at it, trying to identify it. I think you mentioned earlier too, and that's you talked about the two different states of mind, right? The mind of being and the mind of doing.
Yeah.
And in thinking that one is the doer or doing, it can really extend and or get one stuck, as I did, like as I experienced earlier in the week, prolonging that thing that I was not letting in or welcoming, which was, oh, you had a bad sleep and you're feeling kind of bad right now. And it's just remarkable that in the process of just recognizing, even the process isn't the right word, but in recognizing in the moment when a few days had gone by, and to see that, oh yeah, there's not anything to do about this. Like there's nothing I have to act on per se. This is what's happening. This is what's going on. And the immediate sense of relief that occurred, I think it's fair to say that, I don't know, when we've talked about it before, but we talked about suffering.
Yeah.
And how there's an immediate shift from, woe is me, and I'm stuck in this thing, I need to do something about it. Like, that is suffering. And I think that's something I recognized in the middle of the week, is that I'm putting all this, the sense of putting this sort of expectation, or that there's something I can do about it, that it's my personal responsibility, when it's just something that's happening. And then as soon as I recognize that this is just the state that's being experienced right now, the relief that is overcame me. It was an immediate release, and things got easier. I mean, it's easier to do activities after that. Like, they just happen. They start happening. And
I mean, it's almost a paradox.
Well, it is a paradox.
Right. For sure. I mean, that as soon as you realized there was nothing you could do to change it, or you had to do, or whatever, any of that stuff, it changed. I mean, it's almost counterintuitive.
Yeah, you remove the agency of the actor, and action begins.
Right. Which is I think what doesn't, until you've actually experienced it, I think it just seems like that's just
Woo woo.
magic. Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Woo, magical thinking.
Well, I certainly thought of it that way before.
Yeah.
Um, which is what I mean. I suppose that's why the shift is as easy as it is now, because having been stuck in a particular way of thinking or of identifying with problems and being the agent responsible for the situation arising as it is, that's a lot of pressure. And I don't think I mean, I certainly in my own experience, I didn't recognize how much pressure there was in that. And once I had the experience of letting go of that agency or responsibility, the immediate effect of it is long lasting, right? But it took a while to get there, because to get there, you have to break down all that resistance to it in the first place. And, well, no, that means I'm not in control. That mindset is very gripping, right? Something ingrained from very early on.
Did it take a while to get there?
Well, in relative terms, I don't know. I guess it's took me 44 years, Shawn.
Oh, I see that you're saying that way. Right.
What I mean, though, is in regards to I mentioned before, like habits of being. So I don't want to do like a before and after. There was a way I conceived of being before
Yeah.
that was really painful for the course of a good portion of my life.
Right.
Painful in the sense that I think, based on the discussions we've had about what suffering is, right? And then after the shift to never really believing in this stuff or thinking it sounds like woo, especially in just a lot of the language that's used, and I think how clouded it is in mystery, unnecessarily. There's a journey into breaking down a rational mind now, and especially like someone who, I would say, I have like a hyper rational mind, right? It's always looking for rationalizing what's happening and coming up with a story of the why and the how. I didn't recognize that before. Just thought I was being rational, right? And that's the way to be in the world. So until I could actually experience it, the shift and the relief that came with it, from one trying to make sense of it as opposed to just being with it and experiencing it, and not constantly trying to label it and explain it. That is like lived just experience as things are arising. Until I got to that place where, it's almost like short circuiting that part of the brain that's constantly having to narrate it all.
Yeah.
With a sense of purpose, right? With a sense of continuity, and this event ties into this event, ties into this event for this reason, right? This is the reason this all came to pass. Until I could get past that sense of perception, sort of like narrative, time linked narrative of sense of identity, till I could see just on the other side of that and let all of that go and just be in the moment. The only labeling I'm doing is maybe describing it as it comes up. But getting back to the habits, getting on the other side of that, I can recognize more easily now when I sink into identification or identifying with a situation, this is why is this happening right now? How do I get out of this? What do I need to do? What are the steps I need to take to get out of this? Like, to be able to recognize that in the moment now, it's gratifying to know that this switch has been flipped, that I can see it now when I kind of get back into the habit of seeing things a certain way. And then I feel the suffering coming on again. Oh, I think I recognize what's going on. And I just had to let it go. And there's instant relief in it.
Right. So that's brings me back to the time thing. Right? That because when you decided you or recognize you were suffering and decided you wanted to stop suffering, or however that worked, how long did it take?
Well, it was momentous.
But how long did it take between deciding you wanted to stop suffering last week or whenever that was and you actually stopping?
Well, it literally was momentous. It was in the moment. There was a recognition that this is what the mind, whatever, was doing. It
So
was trying to.
how many seconds?
It's instantaneous. It was instantaneous.
Okay.
As
So
soon as the recognition of what was happening, as
yeah.
far as the mind trying to troubleshoot or identify with it, and just going, oh, okay, that's what's going on. There was an immediate sense of relief.
Right.
And things got easier, like instantly got easier.
So if we can kind of look at that micro event, right, and then extrapolate it, right, because you said it took a long time to get there.
Sorry, when I was talking about it took a long time, I was talking about the original, like the first time I ever experienced that. I'm not talking about this last week.
Yeah, I know.
Okay,
I know.
okay. Okay.
I know. So, and I guess that's something that I interested in exploring is this linear perspective we have of it, right? And so,
Yep.
like you said, it took me 44 years, Shawn, to get to that
Yeah.
to get to that place where that was happening. And I think that there's kind of a perception that from an early age I've been working towards this, and I mean there's some truth to that, right? There's I think there's like a sense that there's a different way to be, right? And so, and as we shared about our early travels and stuff like that, and so there's a sense that there's a other way to be. But so this is kind of my question. So what, how long have you and I been hanging out? 2 years now?
Yeah.
November.
2.5, something like that. Is that right? I don't know anymore. Lost my sense of time.
I think so. Something like that. So when you and I started hanging out to when your your perspective shifted as it did these last few days ago, it doesn't seem like there was that much time
I think
involved.
we were working on it. Like, I mean, from the moment we met
Yeah,
to say the first time that we sat together,
yeah,
it was within a year. And and I'm not talking, we were meeting once a week.
yeah.
So if you actually assigned a time value to it.
Right. So I'm curious. So what we were working on
Yeah.
when we were together, I'm guessing was different than what you had been experiencing previously, or was it?
Can you clarify that? When you say what I was working on, or sorry, what
Here's
I
what
was
I'm trying to extrapolate, and who knows
is
if this will be of any interest to anybody but us, but or even anybody but me. but so let's even say not 44 years. Let's say, I don't know, once Jeff was 14, right? So let's make it 30 years, right? That Jeff has been working on this path. So in that 30 years, guessing Jeff was working on this, Jeff was working on that.
right.
There's always this underlying sense of trying to find this happiness or this sense of peace. Um, I don't know where I'm going with this. There's a story. This old, I think it's a Nasruddin. Have you ever heard of Nasruddin? So
No.
I think Rumi tells these stories about he's just kind of this archetypal fool in the Sufi world. Nasruddin, I think it's Nasruddin. Anyways, so this villager comes and sees Nasruddin digging in the sand in the village. And he's like, "What's going on, Nasruddin?" He says, "Oh, I've lost my key to my house." He says, "Oh, can I help you look for it?" "Yeah, sure, you're." So, well, whereabouts did you lose it? He says, "Well, I lost it over there." We said, "Well, Nasruddin, why are you looking here for it?" "Well, there's a lot more light here." So that's why I'm looking here. So, all right. So that analogy, to bring it back. So in that 30 years, if Jeff had been looking in the more efficient place, would it have taken 30 years? Who can
That's a
say?
really loaded question. I don't like,
Good.
as far as being prepared even for a kind of shift. Like, when I think, when I remember the impressions or memories of what like even a 30-year-old Jeff, let alone an adolescent Jeff, and the state of ego attached
Yeah.
to those characters in those times, I don't know that there would have been a willingness to let go or to shift perception necessarily. I think there was always a desire to ease suffering, or to escape pain.
Right.
But I don't know that I don't know how easily or readily an acceptance would come to letting go of that sense of identity. Um, Again, in my own experience, I think it was a crisis that brought me to the breaking point, and I say that in a good way. That there was a readiness, willingness to be open to anything that might ease the suffering, and ultimately that's what led to that letting go of that sense of identity. So I don't know that like in a search, I don't know that any number of silent retreats or seeking out a school of practice with some doctrine, I don't know how much any of that would have sunk in necessarily, or sped it up, or what have
Right.
you.
I guess my hypothesis is that the society we live in has us looking over there for happiness and peace.
Well, the material, particularly the material, yeah, it's
Right.
what's sold to us on a daily basis.
Right. So if society started from the very beginning and had us looking over there, where we actually lost it, then I imagine the story would be different.
Well,
Because
maybe
even in your sharing, like how much layers of tarnish or whatever were put on there that you
learning and
had
conditioning that you have to strip away, basically, right?
Right. So you had the crisis, and in some ways the crisis shone the light on that these things weren't it. Would you say? Do you know what does it make sense what I'm saying? I mean, why does a crisis have that impact on so many of us? It's almost a collapse.
Yeah, well, I mean, because the construct or the identity with which we were accustomed to navigating the world, I've heard a psychotherapist express it this way, paraphrasing. But basically, the way one goes about being in the world when it ceases functioning, then you have to find, like, it generates like an impetus to recognize that, okay, the way that I've been being is not functioning, like that's not working.
Right, but you were led that it was supposed to work. No?
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. Then no, not in my particular case. I would say, if anything, I was cautioned against the way it was being to some extent, because it butted up against a lot of norms. I had a material construct of identity, in a sense, that was striving for perhaps a more kind of spiritual way of being on the material plane. That was pushing for that sort of thing without really knowing what it was looking for.
What does that mean?
That's a good question. What does that mean? Okay, so knowing or understanding intuitively that like it's not material things in the material world that are going to satisfy this need that I had. And
So there was a recognition of that.
there was a recognition of that very early on. Now that said, my understanding is that yeah, so in sort of breaking down the aspects of the identity construct, like what was in trying to identify what was actually missing. It led to a way of acting out in the world to try to relieve the pain or the suffering in a way that I identified material.
By changing the world.
Right. By changing the world, right, in a material, on the material plane. When that didn't work, when I didn't change the world miraculously,
that's when the crisis.
Then the crisis hits going, well, that's not the suffering then that you're trying to, that's not where the suffering's coming from necessarily. So there's a recognition there, like, oh yeah, it's not, whatever I'm trying to change in the world, that's not where the pain is coming from. And then there's the turn inward and sort of going into and experiencing the pain while stripping away layers of identity or identifying with that pain by experiencing this pain, by experiencing the suffering and letting it in. I think created fertile ground for the place that we ended, in our sits where we ended up, the place that you helped me get to, in a sense. So like in doing, that therapeutic work that I was talking about, where it's actually examining the story, if you will, of self, and seeing we spoke earlier about language and how like embedded in a lot of the language we use is what we're not welcoming or not letting in. And I can identify with that now. I'm not identify rather, but I can see now how much of my own experience of pain was manifest constantly in the way I spoke about things or the way that I saw the world. In the sense that the identity that I carried in the world was based on a narrative, like a construct, with some sense of continuity over time. This happened to me, this is why I am the way I am. This happened to me, this is why I am this way. This is why I acted like this. And yeah, welcoming those portions in that I would have rather avoided or I was suppressing, that was the beginning of release, in just sitting with it and being with it. Now, I didn't know where that was going, and when we started then just basically the practice of being, as we went through releasing, in the therapeutic modality, I'd gone through a lot of releasing in that regard, having to sit with it, experiencing it, and then seeing the stickiness of it start to let up a little. But I didn't know what that meant yet, and I was still kind of attached to the story of self, that construct that I had built up to that point. And I feel like those are the steps that we took. It was actually looking at the whole story and going, oh, well, that's just a story, though, right? You do recognize that, right? The story of the doer. And I was nowhere near that point yet, because it made no sense to me to look at it in that manner. Of course, I'm still the one doing. I'm changing the narrative right now, was what I was experiencing.
That's funny because you talk about how when we first met, that question, which I don't remember asking you that question, but
Oh,
I mean that's kind of the same thing, right? It's just like, well, that's just a story, right?
I was railing about my employer and the state of affairs
Right.
where I worked, and going on about the insidious nature of it and how toxic the workplace was and how they were gunning for people. And you turned to me and said, oh, is that what you believe? With your little grin. Well, yeah, that's what I just told you. Wait a minute. Yeah, that was a moment.
Interesting.
It was a good question.
Yeah, not sure. Majority of people would have thought it was a good question.
Well, it's one as a lover of discussion and different experiences or different perceptions. You know, no one had ever asked me a question like that before. Which kind of that did, you know, in my experience, that kind of shook me down to the foundation. It's like, wait a minute, how did he come to ask a question like that? What does that mean?
Hopefully we'd had a couple of days of rapport built up before that.
Well, I think we hit it off pretty quick.
Yeah.
When we were sitting at that table together, because I mean, we were definitely probably the more jovial ones there, having some fun with the whole thing.
Oh dear.
In a room dealing with conflict.
So I think I need to stop.
Okay.
I gotta go do the other thing, plumbing thing. But just for next time, I want to ask you more about why you ever started on the path to mindfulness. And because that's kind of how we started hanging out together after the class, right? As we
Yeah, because I kept bringing it up. Hey,
right.
for all the people wanting to study or practice mediation, it's really good to pay attention to what's going on internally. Mindfulness is a great practice. Mindfulness is a great practice. Has anyone here heard of mindfulness? Turns out someone had. A lot more than I had.
Oh well. All right, so
Yeah.
we'll put that down for next time.
Yeah, that sounds like a good starting point for sure. All right, Shawn.
Have a good
Really
week.
good to see you.
And I'll maybe I'll just stop this.